fewer villains rattle my cage more than the jerk, or the player, I guess is a more accurate term. After all, these misogynistic prats see women as nothing more than game pieces to be played with. They see us as things to be conquered and owned, their property. These characters are made worse by just how close to home they are. Jerks are everywhere, in person and online. You can't escape them, whether they're catcalling you in the street or helpfully commentating on how you look in that photo you posted on social media. It's not on. I'm thankful to have grown up surrounded by men like my dad and granddads, who were so respectful and kind towards the women in and out of their lives. But I've also experienced an abundance of men who aren't like that. Before I met Adelaide, I'd even been seeing a few of them, just because my peers made it feel like an obligation. It's a load of crap. I never met Henry face to face, and he's lucky I didn't, because I would have punched him right between the eyes and kicked him right where the sun don't shine. As I'm writing this, Anakin, my faithful toad, is bobbing his head in approval. I'm sure it would have helped make his life hell in all. The player is what I like to call a silent trope, not necessarily in volume, but in the sense of the trope existing but not necessarily being noticed, at least not as prominently as other character tropes. I believe this is why Henry was able to slip under the radar for so long, because people like him exist everywhere, and he didn't stand out until my brother intervened. For some reason, I still don't quite understand how Charles was a threat to Henry. A ludicrous notion, I'm sure you'd agree, but he was. Perhaps it wasn't necessarily the fear of Charles stealing his women from him, but more of a case of there's another man in my territory who looks like the kind of man who'll rat me out if I'm not careful. Henry and others of his sort rely on the silence of others to get away with their actions. They settle comfortably in the knowledge that they have the power to get away with what they do. Characters like James Bond are praised for their suaveness with the ladies, which is nothing more than an exploitation of his position as one of the best spies, if not the greatest spy in the world. If Bond was a woman, she would almost certainly be branded a whore and slut-shamed for the amount of men she meets. But as a man, Bond is celebrated for it. It's a societal double standard which is gross and so tiring. The archetype dates all the way back to Zeus, possibly even further. He's a misogynistic jerk who can get away with what he does because of his position of power as the head of the pantheon. His wife and sister, but let's not get into that, Hera, is often depicted as spiteful and manipulative, even though she has every right to be upset that her husband is going off and fathering children with hundreds of different women. Does she take her vengeance to the extreme? Of course she does, she's a goddess. But even human women who get their own back on their cheating partners are the ones chastised for it, and it needs to stop. Besides Zeus, I can't think of a worse depiction of this trope than Glenn Quagmire from Family Guy. This man is the literal embodiment of a garbage human being. He regularly assaults and harasses women and nobody bats an eye. He is the extreme of what these jerks could turn into if left unchecked. Thankfully, there are plenty of men out there in the world who do treat women with the respect they deserve, and those men are playing a large part in breaking down toxic masculinity, the root to all this nonsense. But we all must play a part. When we see someone being a jerk towards someone else, especially if they're part of a marginalised group, we must speak out. The only way this will end is when they know they can't get away with what they are doing anymore. The player thinks he knows the game, but when we take the lead and put him in his place, we will always come out on top.